All right, guys, we're almost there. We've only got a few more to go, so bear with me. We're getting close to the end. But for this episode, we're going to go over components, how we can best use them, how we can best leverage them in our designs to save ourselves time and be, again, there's that word, consistent. So let's hop over into Figma and we will have a little bit of fun. And I know I take a hot second to share this every time. I just want to double check, make sure you guys can see what I'm seeing. I'd hate for you guys to not be able to see my screen. So what is a component? Components are, simply put, assets that you can use multiple times in your design that are all linked to each other. Now, I know that's a very high level explanation, but we will get into it a little bit more. But first, I want to hop back over. You remember last episode, we went to Material Designs design system. I want to hop back over there and look at a couple of things. So if you notice, there's a lot of options that we can look at in Materials design system. We went through grids last time, but if you come over here, you have all these different options. You've got layout, the environment, navigation, color, typography, all these different amazing things. Got shapes. We've got shape hierarchy. Again, I highly recommend you come in here. You can learn so much just by going through this design system. And what we're looking for here is they've got a lot of components that they use in their design system over and over and over again. For example, they've got buttons, they've got cards, they've got data tables, they've got text fields and the snack bar and the navigation bar and all these different things. So again, go through material design, look at their components, see some of the things that they've put together. We are going to hop over into Figma and make our own and show you how this works. The reason I'm showing you Material UI is if you come in here and you look around at their different things, you've got their icons. That's probably a good place to look at these. They've got these main icons that Google uses, their email icon, their calendar. They are going to use those same icons consistently. Every time they reference email or their calendar, they're going to use those icons. So I'm going to show you why these are so important and how we can utilize them. Okay, so I've thrown up an artboard. I just threw a piece of paper on here so we'd have something to use. You'll also notice I went into my text styles and I changed H4 to a button. I wanted to have a text that I would use consistently across all my buttons, so I just relabeled that button. I didn't change any of the properties of it though. I also relabeled that on my type scale just so I wouldn't forget. So let's start by making a button. Buttons are a very common component that we're going to use throughout almost every design, so it's a good place to start. So I'm just going to make a rectangle here. I like base 8, so maybe we'll do, I don't know, 72 by 32. See how that looks. That looked kind of funky, but it's okay. You guys get the idea. And I'm going to round out that border radius a little bit. You know, I'm going to make this a little bit longer. Let's do 80. And I'm going to throw some text up there. Again, it's already set to button, so that's helpful. And we'll just call this button. And I want to make sure that's all centered up. Okay, now I am going to actually make a couple copies of this button, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. So I'm going to group that, and I'm going to duplicate it. And I'm just going to do 3 copies for now. Why do I need multiple? There are different instances in which you would use a button. For example, you might have a click state, a hover state, an inactive state, or a default state. You know, there's many states that you might have. So we're going to make those different states using components. So for example, maybe my first state that I want to use is going to just be an inactive state. You can't click on it yet. You haven't filled out all of your information that allows that button to be activated. I want to use my color styles. I want to be consistent. So I'm just picking a gray for now. Normally we'd put some thought into this, but I'm just picking a gray. And look, it's even got that little blue tint to it. Maybe for my for my active state, I want to do one that is, let's take our secondary color here. Let's go with our blue. And maybe in this instance, I would change my text color to white, but I think I'm gonna lighten this button up a little bit. Too much. Let's go with this blue. That's our, okay, you can click on this button now. And then maybe I want a hover state. And so I am going to change this one. And maybe when I hover over this button, it's going to change to a darker blue. And in this instance, maybe I'll change the text to white just so we've got some of that contrast. So we've got these different states. You can't click on it yet. Okay, this button's active. You can click on it when you're ready. You're hovering over this. It's ready to be clicked on. What does this do for us? Let's make these into components first, and I'll show you guys what this can do. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to click my first button here. And you can either right click and go to create component. You can come up here to this little icon up here. This is also, no, this is use mask, sorry. This little icon, this is create component. Or you can see the keyboard shortcut there is Command Shift K. But I just used the button there, made that into a component. I'm going to do the same with this one, and I'm going to do the same with this one. Now, if you guys think back to when we did our color styles and our typography styles, the way you label in Figma makes a difference, okay? It groups things together, or it separates things. The same applies with components. I'm going to come over and I'm going to rename this first one. And I'm going to just call this button to start, and I'm going to add that slash. If you remember, what this did is it made a group. There is now a group called button. And in this group, I am going to have a subcategory, and that is going to be, let's do default. Okay. So if I come over to my assets, and this is the lovely thing about components, when you make a component in Figma, it automatically jumps over to this asset panel. And you'll see right now it's located on this page, A4-1. I'm going to relabel this. We'll call this component page. So now in my assets, it's on component page. I can drop it down, and I have, don't worry about these two yet. We haven't named those, so those are kind of just in there. We have component page, and we've got this category button. Now if I drop down button, there's my default state button. So let's see how this works with the other ones. I'm going to select this one. I'm going to rename it again. Keyboard shortcut for that is Command R. And I'm going to do the same thing. I want this to go into that same category, button. They're grouped together. But this one I'm going to say is active because I can click on this now. And when we go to our assets, now that button moved down here. So we have in our button section, default and active. We've got one more. Let's name that. Let's call this one button slash hover. So now in my assets, all of these buttons have been put into one section. Now I could get a lot more specific about this. Maybe let's do this for example. Let's call this let's rename what these say. Let's say go. And we will center. Ooh, don't do that. We will get that centered up. And then let's call this go. And we'll get that centered. And then this last one will say go. And we'll get that centered. Now this is where components can get really cool because I can rename this. I can say I want it to be still a button. Obviously these are buttons, so I want them in the button category. And then I'm going to say go, but I'm going to add another slash. Now what that did is it says there's this group called button, and within that group there's another group called go. And now I'm going to call this default. So if we go to our assets, you see we have these buttons here, but we have, if we go to a bigger menu, we have buttons, go buttons, and then our button that we just put in there. So I'm going to do the same with these ones. I'm going to rename go active. And then this one, button, go hover. Why is this helpful? Well, maybe I have 3 more buttons, and these ones are, I'm going to detach these. So you have to be very careful when you are making your master components that you don't just copy, because you're going to make everything connected. I'll show you how that works in a minute. But I am going to change the text in this one. Just to make things easy, we're going to call this stop. Stop. and stop. There's going to be more than one button in a design very often. So let's rename this one. Instead of go, we're going to call this stop. And this one, again, instead of go, stop. And I bet you guys can guess what I'm doing here. Stop. So what did this do? If we've grouped these correctly, we should be able to go into our assets. You have to make them into components, guys. I didn't make these into components yet. So let's do that. Okay, now if we go into our assets, you see we have this big group called buttons. That can be expanded. Now we have go buttons and stop buttons. There's my list of go buttons. There's my list of stop buttons. Whenever I'm in a design, if I want to use one of these buttons, all I have to do is drag it in. So I can be very consistent, very easy to gather my assets together and have them all in one place. Now, what is the other benefit to labeling like this? You see how all these stop buttons are in one group? That makes them instances of each other, or at least that's what Figma calls it, is instances, right? So what that means is if and I'm not going to do it with these because these are my master component. I don't want to mess with these. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to grab one of these out of my asset panel and I'm going to drag it onto my design. And just for being a good example, I'm not going to do it on my components page. I'm going to make a new artboard and we'll do it on a desktop. We'll do it over here. You know, that is a really small button for a desktop. Let's change that. Let's do a phone, the iPhone 8. So I'm going to drag my button over onto my iPhone. I'm actually going to do my default button, right? Stop. It's on the screen. Let's say I have, you know what, let's actually use the go button. I think I can do a better example here. Let's build something really quickly. We're just going to build a form field, right? Maybe you fill out your first name and your last name. We'll just turn on a little stroke. And your password, okay? We'll say first name. And again, you want to make sure you're using your text styles so you're being consistent. Password. So this person hasn't filled anything out yet, so that button is inactive, right? But maybe on your next screen, we're going to get rid of that. Maybe on this next screen, they've filled out, well, we'll use real text. We'll use John Doe because everybody loves good old John Doe. So maybe on this screen, we've got John Doe, and he has finally finished filling out all of his forms. He's got his password there. We're ready to go. Well, this is now, I don't want to delete this button and drag another one in because what if I put it in a different spot? I don't want to take the time to make sure the X coordinates and the Y coordinates are all the same. What I can do, because these are grouped together like this, if I right click on this button, you'll notice there's this section down here that says swapped instance. Right now I'm in my default instance, but I can change that with one click to active, and it switches to that active version of this component. It's a version of itself because they're in the same group. Now maybe I want to show in my prototype what it looks like if somebody hovers over that button. Again, I just right click and swap to my hover instance. So now when I prototype, I'll be able to show the exact interaction design that happens with these instances. Now, the other place where components are super, super, super valuable, I showed you this with some of the other styles, our typography styles and our color styles, but the same applies to components. If I want to make a change, let's say I don't like that this text is black, maybe I want it to be white, but I've already got this component used 40 times throughout my design. All I have to do is come to my master component, keep your masters in a place that's easy for you to find. Generally, what I will do is I will actually make another page for master components, but we're doing this all in here for an example. If for whatever reason you lose it, you can right click and you can say, go to master component. That's going to take me to my master. I'm going to zoom out so you can see how this works. Let's drag this a little bit closer so we can see it. If I go to my master component and I change something, every time that component is used in my design, it will be changed. So example, if I stretch this component way out, you'll see it is stretching it where I have that copy. Now the same does not happen if I go the other way. If I stretch out this copy, it does not affect the master. It's a one-way road. It's like a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square, right? That's like, that's the parent can tell the kid what to do, but the kid can't tell the parent what to do. Something like that, right? Now, here's where it gets tricky. Because I have made this change in my instance of this component, it's kind of like saying, I'm not going to listen to you on sizing anymore. So I can't affect it anymore with this master. But I haven't changed the text. So maybe I go into my text and I'm going to change that to white. The text still changes, but I've overridden the size and shape. So that's not going to change. What I can do is if I make a big change in one instance, I can go in here and I can say, push to master. I want to push all of this forward to my master component and save those changes. But I'm not going to do that. I am just going to reset this so it stays the same size. I want them to be consistent with each other. Now, you might be asking, well, why is it helpful for it to go one way and not the other way? Maybe there is one time in my design where I want this button to be slightly different than every other time I used it. I can change that one button without affecting all of the other instances. But if I make that change in the master, it will affect all of them. I hope that makes sense how I did all of that. If not, definitely leave a comment and we can go over it a little more in detail and maybe a little slower. But I highly, highly, highly recommend you practice with components and instances and keep them all in an organized place. You know, have that master component page where you can know if you're not changing the masters by accident. You're only messing with the piece that you want to mess with. This is so powerful when it comes to being consistent through your designs. You want to get to a place where 90% of what you use is components. It takes time to get there, but it will save you so much time in the long run. You know, if I make this whole flushed out design and it's all in high fidelity and I present it to a user and maybe they can't see the text against the shape background, or maybe they don't like the shape of the button or the size is hard to see, I can very quickly just make one change and it will change across my entire design. If I don't use components, I have to make that change every single instance of that component or that button. That's a nightmare. Avoid it if you can. Use these components, and again, it's going to take time, but eventually as you become practice and familiar with components, you will be able to leverage them, and your designs will not only be faster, they'll be more professional, they'll be better looking, and you will just have an overall better design experience. So we're so close to done, guys. This next episode, we're going to hop over into organization. How can we put all this together and hand it to our developer team or a new team of designers or a stakeholder? Where do we put everything so it makes sense? So I will see you guys in the next video and we'll hop right into that.